The brakes found on the Mustang Cobra are a great, reliable, and relatively inexpensive way to increase braking performance, and they're relatively easy to install. We have the front end of the vehicle raised and the wheel off already. We're going to turn it to the right to get better access to the two caliper bolts. These steps are very similar to the front brake maintenance section. Again, you have the top and then the bottom bolt, but in this case we're actually going to remove the brake line. The first step is to remove the C-clip, as you see here. We're using a flathead screwdriver and a hammer. And here's a close-up of the C-clip. Now at this point you want to make sure you have a drain pan underneath the wheels to catch any brake fluid that drips down. Now we're going to use a flare nut wrench here to separate the brake lines. Although we don't show it here, I'd recommend using a rag underneath where the fitting connects. With the two pieces disconnected, you can remove the larger end from the bracket. At this point, we can also remove the caliper and set it aside. The new brake calipers come with the brake pads pre-installed. So we won't be covering how to reinstall the brake pads, but it's a fairly straightforward process covered in most repair manuals. But before we can install this new caliper, we actually need to remove the caliper bracket. The new assembly will not use it. With the two bolts removed, we can slide it off and then remove the rotor. Now, it's interesting to see the old rotor compared to the new one. The new 13-inch rotor on the right is going to give us a lot of stopping force. Again, we're going to use the lug nut to keep things in place, and then slide the new caliper and bolt it directly to the caliper bracket holes. And with the caliper in place and torqued down, we can go ahead and hook up the brake lines. You see here it includes a banjo bolt and two washers. We place the larger end of the brake hose into the bracket, lining it up with the notch. Then hammer in the C-clip and go ahead and reconnect the other end of the fitting using your flare nut wrench to tighten it. Now at this point, we can take the other end of the brake line and put a washer around the top end of the banjo bolt, thread it through the brake hose, and then add the second washer prior to connecting it to the caliper. Now you want to make sure that the brake hose is kind of facing upward and not bent too heavily, and then go ahead and tighten it up. Again, trying to keep the hose face somewhat upward. Now after this, you want to do a final check on all the bolts, make sure everything's torqued down properly, and then most importantly, you need to bleed the brakes, which you're going to cover in the next section.